Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me and my very special guests, two of Broadway's favorites. Please say hello to actress Julia Murney and composer, lyricist, writer, and actor Andrew Lippa. Welcome, everyone. How are you today?
All right. How are you?
I'm doing good. I know I'm upside down on your screen, so I apologize for that, Julia. But I think
everyone. Richie looks like he's hanging like a bat, but it's okay. It's totally okay. I can go with it. Quarantine has taught me just roll with it.
Roll with it. Now, where are you two coming from, and how are you two doing? Julia, we'll start with you. Where are you living, and how's it going?
I am in Manhattan, and in my apartment with my little dog too, I'm fine. I mean, this is not ideal by any stretch, but you know what I am is healthy.
Yeah.
And everyone that I know is healthy. So screw it. The rest of it is just figuring it out. And I mean, and the big figure outs are starting to reveal themselves the further into this we get. But I'm very grateful for my dog, Pepper. And I'm very grateful for these these big windows behind me.
Love it.
Because I get a lot of light. And it also allows me to look out on the street and judge people.
I love it. That's what it's come down to.
It's also great in a video environment, Julia. You're lit like a professional. It looks incredible.
There's no ring light going on right now, and I have one.
An incredible purpose. I think it's a wonderfully trifold, as we say in the window biz.
Nice.
Now, Andrew, where are you coming from?
I'm coming from the place in my mind that is somewhere between sanity and not.
Yeah.
But that's been a constant. I am living, besides, I have the blessings of living in Manhattan, but I am not in Manhattan at the moment. I'm at our permanent home in Columbus, Ohio. And we being my fiance, Tom, and I, and we have this beautiful house here. And I'm really, really grateful. We live in a historic neighborhood that's on a ravine and right near a river and a park. And I get to walk every day. And we were talking about this yesterday when we went on a walk together, how, there was some construction going on with the power company, and there were a group of people walking by these trucks, and it was, and I do this thing when we walk by them, I'm like, oh my God, death by 7-year-old, look out, death by poodle. Like if you get near anybody or anything. Yeah. And I'm a little on edge about that. I can't imagine what life is like for you guys in New York right now, or what it's been like for the past 9 weeks, because it's impossible to avoid people. So I'm glad you're at home and safe.
I will say that, Richie, I don't know what area you're in, but
I'm in Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen.
So it's maybe a little more dense down there. I don't know.
It is, yeah.
Up on the Upper West Side, I basically only see the 4 corners that I can see from my windows, because my dog does not walk very far because she has little tiny legs. Yeah. And so it's actually very easy to socially distance when I walk my dog. Very, very easy.
Good.
Except on weekends, because people are working from home, more people come out. And then it's a little more, and it's gotten much better. But the first time I went to the market, I shop at Fairway. And the first time I went, weeks and weeks ago, it was like going into the Thunderdome.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a fist fight in the line behind me between 2 women, one of whom said the other one coughed on her on purpose. Yeah. And it was so much.
So so you see, when you're afraid that someone has coughed on you with coronavirus, the thing next to do is to engage in a hand-to-hand combat.
Physical, exactly.
That surely won't give you anything.
Surely. I will say though, yesterday I had finally, I needed to get out for a second, and I got in my car, partially to drive my car and make sure it hadn't broken down in the 7 weeks it's been sitting there. And I drove out and had some surprise visits with some friends in Brooklyn and in Queens, and I brought them brownies and whatever. And my friend Jeff, when I got to his house, we were on the sidewalk, and we pretend hugged. And then when I went to leave, we both went to pretend hug, and then we just hugged.
Yeah.
And I started crying, because that is the first physical contact I have had with another human being in all of this time. And he went, really? I said, Jeff, I don't live with my husband like you do. Yeah. I am physically, I've got this poor dog who's please get out, please get out. Stop touching me.
She can only take so many hugs.
Yeah, totally.
But Julia, Jeff clearly is quarantined, and you feel like he's fine. And
yeah, I do. I mean, I take it very seriously, and I have just been in my apartment, basically. I am on the sort of the spectrum of I wash my hands, I wear a mask, I don't take a Silkwood shower every time I come home. That's just my choice.
Yeah.
Silkwood Shower, for those of you who don't know the record, look it up. It's a great movie, and Cher's in it.
Cher, directed by Mike Nichols.
Yeah.
Cher wears an Equus t-shirt, just so you know, everybody knows when she and Meryl are sitting out, she's got her Equus t-shirt on.
Richard Ridge, you're amazing.
I can't tell you anything else, but I can tell you stuff like that.
but those who are doing that, I'm not. Yeah. There's not a judgment on that. I think you have to go through this precisely how you have to go through this. Because that happens in your own personal sphere. It gets tricky when you get outside. Mm-hmm. And there was a woman this morning walking in the street. Anyone who didn't have a mask on, she was screaming at the top of her lungs, "You're going to hell!" I fear that's going to get worse.
Was she one of those people who was doing that last year as well? Because maybe that's what she's talking about.
Unclear. Maybe she just got to my neighborhood.
Upper West Side, potential people, liberals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Julia, do you go out to shop? Do you go to the grocery store, or do you have stuff sent in?
I do. No, because I've never been one to get my stuff sent in, but I checked when this started, but the lead time was 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was like, I need the lettuce now.
Yeah.
So, so I glove up and mask up and go. And now Fairway has got it together, and it's distanced, and it's, whatever. It's much better than the initial Thunderdome visit. But that visit to the market was the most anxious I had felt the whole time, because I feel very lucky. I'm in a quiet apartment and I've got my light, and you just think about people in the service, in any kind of service industry, who are still working, who have to get on the subway to get to their jobs, so they still have a job.
Yeah.
And it's a remarkable time.
Yeah. Andrew, you were saying your husband is a teacher, right?
My fiance is a teacher. Yes.
So I think once you've been together for all that time.
Yeah, I know. No, we're affianced. Also, there's a lawnmower going on outside as proof of where I am. Do you want? Should I close the door for our listeners, or is it?
We don't hear anything.
We don't hear it.
Oh, okay, good.
We don't hear anything.
So then you can call me out as a liar, because he's going to be able to prove that there's a lawnmower outside. Yes, he's an elementary school music teacher and a multiple woodwind performer, and he plays. In a normal year, he'll play up to 10 or 12 different productions of shows and concerts. And he had a whole summer season. We were going to the West End Playhouse this summer, where he's played multiple years. And we know it's wonderful. It's kind of our home base. And I take all of my gear and work in a rented house and write songs. And he goes and plays a show. And he was supposed to do Kinky Boots. And they've closed the whole season. So we're not going to Vermont this year. So that's unfortunate. Was he teaching from home? Yeah, right now they're doing the remote learning, and in the case of Tom's school district, at first they were, it was all new to everybody. So they're trying to plan out how to do it and how to engage. And the kids are very used to technology in a way we aren't even. It's just second nature to them. And they, over time, they've asked music and art and gym, I think, as well, because how do you teach gym, remotely? But I think they've asked them and the other teachers, in addition to what they call the specials, to give less work and be less strict about it. So I think it's been really minimized. The school year's nearly over, and they are going to go back to school in August. I mean, everything's going to start on schedule. They just don't know yet if it's going to be in a building. They're talking about splitting everything into half days. And so they have half the number of kids in the building at any time, and they would exclude having lunch. the kids who depend on school lunch because of their family situation will be given a brown bag lunch from the school. So that's really good that those kids are being cared for.
And the problem with that, of course, is that what do the families do who actually count on the kids being in school? They have to go to work.
Yes, there's that issue as well. And the school itself, I mean, I've been in that school multiple times visiting Tom and having lunches with him. Yeah. And, you know, it's a bunch of kids, you know, 5 to 10-year-old kids. And of course they're on top of each other. And when they're lined up in the halls and they're, you know, how do you practice that kind of social distancing with children and really, you know, adhere to it and stay strict with it? It's going to be a challenge, I think. So I think they're working on figuring out how to do it. If it's prudent to do it, if the governor's going to allow them to do it, all of that stuff, everybody's still up in the air about that in a good number of states. Yeah,
because one of my sisters is a teacher. She's doing the same thing. She was homeschooling and Zooming and Googling, and they're trying to figure out next season. And my other sister is a nurse who's been on the line every day. I mean, she's been quarantined from her family for this going into the 3rd month. Wow. I mean, it's wild. So it's interesting to look at people's different perspective, like where you are, like we're in the city, you're in Ohio. You know, when this all happened, you know, most stars and actors and creators that I've spoken to, the hardest thing for them right away was wrapping their mind around what happened and then trying to put structure back into their life. Was structure the hardest thing for both of you? Like, so days just didn't turn in, like hours just kept going by and you didn't know which day it was. Was there structure in your life from the very beginning of this pandemic?
Not for me.
Okay.
I mean, Lippa and I are like sort of in different positions in that he's got stuff to work on. Yeah. And I don't. I was in a show that had not yet begun rehearsals, was about to begin rehearsals, and then obviously did not. And it actually shut me down. I have not felt like singing at all. Yeah. I've done a couple things in a charity situation for friends that I'm like, I would never say no to you. Yeah. But it's been a little anxiety ridden. So yeah, because I had the opportunity certainly at the beginning. My parents live an hour and a half north. They have a big yard. I could be there. But I felt like at first, when I didn't really understand, none of us understood, I think, what it all was. I was like, I'm just going to be in the city for a couple of weeks so I can get some autonomy and figure out my schedule. And it took me some time. And then I was like, what if I'm an asymptomatic carrier? I don't want to bring that to my parents. Yeah. So then I just stayed. Now I feel like I'm actually going up. I was going to go up on Mother's Day, but it wasn't very warm. So my mom was like, we can't sit outside. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to go up tomorrow because it's supposed to be nice.
That's great. Well, I want to talk about the show you were supposed to do. You were doing, I think Dara Roth was producing Between the Lines, right? Yeah. Tell me about that show, because we were following that. I couldn't wait for that to open. This is such a fascinating project. What can you tell us about Between the Lines? So I know a lot of stuff's been moved, but so now it's moved. I just looked at the website today. It's a movie year, but what is Between the Lines and who are you playing? Who are you going to play?
It's based on a novel by Jodi Picoult, who is a many times award, what's it called? New York Times bestseller. Yeah. And her daughter, they wrote a young adult book together, and her daughter is a grown woman. And they wrote this young adult book together, and it's been musicalized, and this is that. And it's very sweet. Excuse me. It's about a young girl whose parents are having a terrible divorce, and she is obsessed with, she finds this fairy tale book in her high school library, and she's obsessed with it. Yeah. And wishes that she could live in that world. And one day the prince in the book starts speaking to her, and hilarity ensues. And basically it's mostly about figuring out how to live the life you want to live if you feel stuck in the story that you're in. And it's by a female songwriting team who have never had a New York show before. So it's a really big deal for them. And I mean, of course it's completely sad and disappointing, but like we hadn't even begun rehearsals. Yeah. There were other, I mean, I think about like, for example, like the ladies of the musical Six and the writers and everything who were opening like 20 minutes before they shut down Broadway, to be that close is so aggressive and shocking. And I mean, I'm certainly bummed, but I know they're committed to wanting to bring it in when they can, and hopefully that will happen. But you know, now I have to think about like all my friends who were involved in Frozen. You know?
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
it's just done.
That was a big blow yesterday when everybody read
Yeah.
that. I was like, ooh, this is a big one to go.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised in that I knew something was going to happen to somebody. But anyway, so that's Between the Lines. And
if anybody can make it happen, Daryl Rothkott. I know Jeff Calhoun was directing and Paul
Yes.
McGill was choreographing. What a great team. Like I said, if anybody can make this come back, it's Daryl Roth. We will all be there when this all comes back. You know, Andrew, for you, were you structured already? I mean, when this all hit, when you were in Columbus, Ohio, did your life change the first week or two, or what happened?
I mean, look at me. Aren't I the quintessence of structure? Like, look at me. Julia, for a second before I answer Rich's question, Between the Lines, if I was the composer, I'm not suggesting they do this or that I should be, but if I were the composer of Between the Lines, the major theme of the show musically would be written between the lines. So I would only use F's, A's, C's, and E's on the treble clef. And that I would write a theme that was only, they could be sharps or flats, but they could only be the notes F, A, C, E, which are the notes between the lines. That's like a little composer thing I would have done. So if you want to pass that along to those folks, I could say,
do you want me to text that to them?
It's a huge idea. No one will care, and it's huge.
And here's the thing. Thank God now they have a whole year to implement.
Yeah, I think they need. I think if I were them, I would follow what I said.
You two are like brother and sister. I have to tell you, we're going to get into that, but I want to go back.
More like father and daughter, really. And yeah, and so my answer to the structure thing is, I found my story echoes Julia's somewhat. I think any of us prone to anxiety, we're even more anxious. I am prone to anxiety, and those first 3 or 4 weeks, I was meant to be at the opening of 6, and I left New York that morning. I canceled going in anticipation of things getting bad. And then when I got back to Columbus 2 hours later, I got a text that said the shows were all closing in New York.
Yeah.
And I was anxious and unable to be creative. I was doing a lot of busy work, emails, conversations, trying to keep a lot of balls in the air and trying, like everybody, to figure out, well, what does this mean and how long is this going to be and how is this going to affect my not only my daily life, but my family's lives and my capacity to make a living, and how am I going to, if we stop licensing musicals, which is a large portion of how I make a living, then what's going to happen? And the notion of developing new work is great, but the question of when I'll ever be able to get in a room with anybody and how much further down the road anything will get pushed. So the first few weeks were not fun. And then I settled into a real sort of can-do-ness. You know, I'm doing all these Tiger King parody songs. You probably know about it.
Oh yeah.
And I've done a number of other one-offs. I'm writing a big song for the United Jewish Appeals virtual Israel Day parade that's coming up in June. And I'm saying yes, like most of us are, to benefits and whatever anybody wants us to show up for. Not unlike being here today, we're just yes. We want to be part of the community and we want to talk to folks. But I have found in the past month that I and many writers I know who are particularly writers who like to engage in deadline-oriented projects, sometimes that's more Hollywood than it would be Broadway, are busier than ever. I'm involved in 5 or 6 things that have the potential to actually be pushing forward, and I have to deliver material for these things on a weekly basis. And that can often mean a song, but it sometimes means like script meetings or discussions or, you know, concept pitches and all that kind of thing. And I'm grateful for all of that. But I find the reality is the only people who can work at full speed right now are writers. And if you are able to, if you can make a living, if you're okay, you don't need to go get a job, and a lot of people do, and that's why I do my work at the Drama Skill Foundation, which we'll talk about later. But if you're able to support yourself, you can work. And I'm sitting here in my office, and I can write, and I can produce recordings, I can send tracks to people, I can do stuff all over the internet. And I'm grateful for all of that. And I find that there's a lot of writers I know who are accepting a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think when we get to the side of this where people are ready to go back into production, there will be a number of things that people said they were going to do that they may stop doing. And there will be a number of new things that people may want to do. And it's going to be a big, messy thing, because I think there's also going to be a certain amount of capital that's going to dry up everywhere, as we all know. I don't think that's much of a revelation. And so I think there may be less that gets done. And so it's going to be a challenge to figure out which of the things gets done. And for me, that's why I'm engaging in as many things as I can right now.
Yeah.
Because if one or two of them actually happen, then at least I've made something that's going to go to the next level of production. So I'm grateful for that.
It's interesting because for actors, the one thing that is still in play are voiceovers. Because
you do, which Julia has a whole career.
And I mean, I'm doing a job on Tuesday for a regular product that I work for, and I've already done one several weeks ago. And in a complete coincidence, the studio that I often record those in had already pre-pandemic, had for a different reason, had set their studio up to be remotely worked. So I walk down to 45th and 5th, and I text them, hey guys, I'm here. And I hear the deadbolt open. They're in New Jersey hitting a button. And I walk in, and there are lights on, a few lights, nobody's in there. I go in the studio, the TV's monitor is on, the first spot I have to record is already up. Put on my cans. I'm talking to all kinds of people on a Zoom. And then when it's done, I take the cleaning products, I wipe down everything I touched, I leave, the deadbolt shuts. It is some Blade Runner freakiness. Yeah. But I'm very grateful.
But wow, like what?
That's terrific.
That's an amazing example of how technological the advancements can really help us. I have a friend who's the music supervisor and arranger of Respect, the biopic about Aretha Franklin that stars Jennifer Hudson. And they're going into a 10-week music production period shortly. And some of that music production is going to happen in New York. And so they're going to have musicians in a recording studio. And I'm like, wow, like if I was a violinist, I would not want to be near the trumpet or the trombone. We're blowing spit everywhere. Like, I don't know if anybody read that article. There was that article that circulated in a lot of places about choral singing and singing in proximity of each other. How singing now they think is the biggest enemy of all. It's worse than it's not as bad as sneezing, but it's akin to sneezing because of the amount. I mean, Julia is a lifelong actor, and we know that when you're performing with someone, you know, it's in a very intense thing, singing,
expectorate.
You're sweating, and you're good. You know, that's just the nature of the job. And so that protecting our actors and musicians and through all of the people who we need to make sure that they're safe. You know, these new ways of doing things, like I suppose they'll get a big studio if they can, if there is such a thing anymore in New York, and put baffling in between everybody and really keep it separate and safe. You have to be, it's a very conscious, one of the things I find very interesting about this time, creatively and interpersonally, is how much the people, I think the people who are willing to be conscious and who are actively saying, it's the question of empathy, and it's the question of the people who will practice empathy in a radical and advanced and or enlarged way. Like, I must always now be thinking of the other person, because I have to wear my mask so I don't infect another person if I'm someone who could potentially infect another person. And I have to think about every single person in the thing I'm doing to ensure that we can come up with a suitable way to approach doing this so that nobody is feeling threatened or anxious about it. So I think it takes a lot of thought, and the folks who hired you, Julia, obviously that was a prescient thing, that they did all that prior to the pandemic.
And that's, and most people are being told that they have to be able to record from their homes.
Yes.
I mean, I don't have really the geography in my apartment to set up a recording booth. So that, I mean, I could figure it out if push came to shove, but knowing that I have the option of this studio is huge. I mean, to me, this has always been a thing, but now it's like even more magnified. Like, I want to do a cartoon. I want to do an animated series so badly. And now I really
do that now.
Yeah.
Because I actually, could.
Well, that's what we'll see in a year and a half. We will see more shows that are cartoons than anything else, because we can all make that. You know what I find funny of watching on the internet, watching people play actual pianos. I work on digital instruments, but an actual piano, nobody's gotten their piano tuned. And so anybody who needed their piano tuned and hadn't done it by March 12th, they're shit out of luck. And like even Andrew Lloyd Webber, if you've watched any of Andrew Lloyd Webber's videos, it's so beautiful to watch him play his songs. Yeah. But his piano needs a tuning. I'm like, Andrew, where's the tuner? And it's like one of those things like hair color, or or that you notice, like, oh, okay, well that's an inconvenience next to being ill. So I'm happy to listen to out-of-tune piano.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all comes back, or what. I think everyone has to rethink everything. Live performances, like you said, recording things. And like you said, I think a lot of stuff's going to be cartoons, which is amazing. We have to get into the Wild Party, because you two met at an audition, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. We did.
It was for Stephen Schwartz show.
I'd like Julia to tell the story, but the story, unlike the way I tell jokes, Julia always tells the story exactly as it happened, and I tell the story. It's now like Dostoevsky length. So it's
Okay.
Julia.
Well, we'll get the shortened version before we get into Wild Party.
I like to be concise. I was at an audition for a Stephen Schwartz show called Snapshots. I was very excited because I thought Stephen Schwartz might be there. And I got my equity card doing Godspell. Yeah. And he was indeed there. And I sang my song and I finished. And Stephen Schwartz said to me, "Do you know Meadowlark?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, but I don't have it." And the music director for that show had just played for Patti LuPone's concert gigs on Broadway. And Stephen Schwartz turned to the music director and he said, "Andrew." And Andrew Lippa got up. So I met them both in the same moment. And he went to the piano without any sheet music, because they didn't have it either. And he played the hell out of Meadowlark.
I think I said E major or D major. I think I did ask what key.
See, that's all a blank, because I probably went, I don't know, because I'm sure I didn't know. And
I made her sing it in E major.
And that's how we met. And he played it and I sang it and I finished and he went, "Who are you?" And I went, "Who are you?" And I got that job and it didn't start for several months. And inside those months, Andrew called me and he's like, "Do you remember me?" I was like, "Yeah, I remember you." He said, "We're doing a reading. I just started writing this musical. It's just Act 1. Would you come and be a part of it? And it's called The Wild Party." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I played May, who at the time was just a character in the poem, not what she became inside the musical yet. And I was living with my parents at the time, and I very distinctly remember going home and saying to them, "This music is so good. It's so good." And the other thing, the total sidebar I remember, is that we were rehearsing like way, way east in the old, like, wherever Atlantic, I don't know where we were.
Manhattan Theater Club.
Yes, and they were I'm not way west. Sorry, not way east. And but they were rehearsing a tour of Camelot at the same time. And during the reading, the door was open. And all of a sudden, I don't remember who was sitting next to me, but all of a sudden I look up and standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, is Robert Goulet.
Goulet, yep.
And I saw him, and the woman next to me went, Robert Goulet. And I went, Robert Goulet. And we both went, my God, Robert Goulet. Like total goobers.
Yeah. My addition, if I can add to that story, my memory of that, is that I had met Bob, as we called him. I had met Bob a few weeks before that, because I used to get hired to write arrangements and do the orchestrations and music direction for 30 and 60-second radio and television commercials for Broadway tours and sometimes Broadway shows. And I learned how to work in the studio from doing those advertisements in my early career. And I did that Camelot one, and I worked with him on the phone, like just talking about what it was going to be, and worked with him in the studio and recorded whatever it was that was Impossible Dream that we did. And so when he came by and he opened the door, it was the wrong rehearsal room, and he opened the door. You remember this, Julia? He opened the door and he looked in and he saw me, and it kind of stopped the room for a second, and he saw me and he went, oh, hi, Andrew, and then closed the door. And that was when Robert Goulet, my God, Robert Goulet happened. It was really good.
I love it. All right, we have to get into the Wild Party. Tell me how the musical Dreamgirls inspired you somewhere along the writing, Andrew, of Wild Party?
When I was 16, I grew up in suburban Detroit. When I was 16, in December of 1981, I went to, I was almost 16, and I went to New York with my mother on a buying trip. My mother used to own a ladies' clothing store in suburban Detroit. She'd come to New York 5 times a year to buy in the market. And she would let me skip school, and it was great. My mother wanted to give me a showbiz education. So we would go, and in those days, I don't know if they do it anymore, but they would give, certainly during previews, they gave a lot of free tickets to people in the garment district, people in publishing, people in the hotels. And this man who my mother was buying clothes from said, I got these free tickets to this show. It's called Dreamgirls. And my mother said, what's it about? He goes, it's like Diana Ross, or you're from Detroit, you'll like it. And so we went to see like the 9th preview at the Imperial, and it was one of those, those things that happen in your formative experiences when you're young, that seared this notion of the sort of energetic notion of a musical. Like, I understand how musicals should be about character and structure and action and story and development of ideas and plots, but there's also a big part of a musical that is about energy and about how that energy is carried. And Dreamgirls was the most thrilling, cinematic, always moving musical. I am not.
And it's funny if I can tag on to that one, because I saw Dreamgirls on Broadway originally and second acted it many times, because that's back when you could do that. And I remember that was the first time I didn't really do shows yet, but it was the first time that I saw a show, because the transitions in that show energetically were so extraordinary. And it was the first time I understood, there's a director and a choreographer. There's somebody who makes those things happen. Yeah. I didn't get it until that show.
Oh, that's cool.
As you were.
Cool. And so that experience, many years later, when I encountered the poem, The Wild Party, what I wanted to write was something that never stopped moving. It always felt to me like I wanted those transitions to keep moving in the way that I remembered Dreamgirls did. And I also wanted it to have, I really wanted to write a series of songs that rather than try to fill a lot of time with bits of songs or recitative, or I'm not the best at writing dialogue, so that wasn't really what I knew it was going to be a through sung. And for me, Dreamgirls, though there is speaking in it, feels like a through sung musical, because there's so much underscore, and there's a lot of that recitative like stuff that feels like melodies. They're still very melodic. And so that was a really influential. I mean, that show, Evita and Sweeney Todd, all three of them had a profound impact on writing of The Wild Party. And I remember I just sat down and I knew nothing about how to write a musical, and I knew nothing about jazz, and I just started playing around on the piano. And I have this funny thumb, so I can't play a tenth. So anything that would be like stride piano or playing tenths in the left hand, which is a common thing for piano in jazz, I can't do. And so I can play a seventh very easily. And so I started coming up with like polychords where every note was going to be different, and how would they move. And I ended up like writing a lot of like chord. They were all next to each other, and started to form my own version of what I thought jazz sounded like. And that's what The Wild Party is. That's sort of what defined the musical language of The Wild Party.
Well, I have to tell you, it remains one of my all-time favorite musicals. If someone asked me, Richard, what's top 10, you were right up there, probably top 5. I saw it 3 times at Manhattan Theater Club. I was obsessed with this show, as everybody who got to see it. Like you said, talk about energy. And then you talk about Julia Murney, and of course, Idina Menzel and Tay and Brian. But Queenie, what a role you had, Julia. What are your fondest memories of taking on that show? How challenging was that role for you to do?
It was deeply challenging. And honestly, after I played May in that very first reading, when we ended up doing the Snapshots show together, Andrew said to me at one point, I want you to try Queenie. And I was like, no, I've never had a super healthy confidence level. And it just, I've never looked at someone else do something and thought, ooh, I want to do that. I've been like, wow, look at them. That's awesome. And he fought for me to go and do it up at the O'Neill, which was the next time it had a reading up at the O'Neill in Connecticut, the musical theater conference where they work on new musicals for a couple of weeks. And I got a phone call from the woman who ran the program, and she was like, I do not know who, and they basically just do offers. And she called me and she said, I do not know who you are, but Andrew Lippa said that we have to use you to play Queenie. So would you like to come and play Queenie? And I was like, yes. And then I threw up in my hat. It was at the time, I was much younger. I did not have a lot of experience in New York, which actually benefited me, especially at the O'Neill when lots of fancy producers came to see it. I didn't know who anyone was, so it had no bearing on me. I was just like, I don't know who that white person is, but it was just, I was just able to sort of bathe in this music that I loved so much, and it was such an honor and a dream. And like when I was in college, my dreams were like, maybe I'll get to be in Les Mis. Those were my dreams. It wasn't maybe I'll get to originate things. So in the same way, it never occurred to me that I would be friends with like people like John Kander. He's someone who's been huge in my life since I was a child. And now he's like my grandpa and he hugs me. What? But and it was definitely a challenge. It was a big sing, and that cast was remarkable. And I felt so much like we had each other's backs, and that was a big thing. And because I was in almost every reading of it for, I don't know, how long was that? Like 4 years, maybe, Andrew? Mm-hmm. That I felt like every part of it that any of us creatives, to me, like, we're like, is this the way that should go? Or is that the way that should go? We found the way we thought it should go. And which included during previews. I mean, things changed, new songs came in, songs got thrown out, songs got reassigned, like all of it. But it still remains the high bar of any experience I've ever had.
Well, I want to move. Go ahead. I want to move before you go back to that. I want to go to John Kander just for a second, because I know John Kander and Fred Ebb I adore. They're all over my house.
Is John with us on this call?
No, but I wish he was. Seriously, if I could move this around, there's Kander and Ebb are like my all-time favorites. There are posters from all of their shows. I knew Freddie really well, and John I adore. But I know that you got to do First You Dream, Julia, And you got to sing The Money Tree, which is one of my all-time favorite songs from the act. But Andrew, John Kander and Fred Ebb gave you some career life lessons. Tell me. Yeah.
John and Fred were so extraordinarily important in my early life. One of the things we had in common was a wonderful man named Michael Gibson, who was an orchestrator of great repute and orchestrated 3 of my shows, Charlie Brown and Wild Party and The Little Princess, and unfortunately passed away very young of cancer in the early 2000s. And Michael did all of John and Fred's shows, I think somewhere after Chicago, somewhere like starting the late 70s or early 80s. He worked on all of their shows after that. And so we had that wonderful little connection musically. And John and Fred came to see the Wild Party and were so incredibly enthusiastic about it. They called me, each of them called me, praised me. And specifically, John called me about a month in. But one of the things I was going to mention, and I will factor the John story into this, is that we were doing the Wild Party at the Manhattan Theater Club, and I passed out after the 3rd preview and was hospitalized for a day and a half, and split my chin open, had stitches, and was exhausted and put on anxiety medication, and I was not doing so great. And then when I got home from 3 days of convalescing, I wrote a song that we put at the show the next day, and we had people coming. There was so much excitement around the Wild Party. People like Michael Eisner, who was then the chairman of the Walt Disney Corporation, and Bette Midler, and Marvin Hamlisch, and a good number of artists and important people in show business were told, like often happens with a show that looks like it's going to be a winner, come see it before it opens. And we had the big meeting a week before about all departments. Could we transfer to a particular Broadway theater, and could we make the set fit, and could we make the musicians that certain size, and we do all of the departments. And we were led to believe that it was going to do that, and then it didn't. And so John called me about a month later and asked me how I was doing, and I said, well, we extended a week. And I'm like, in hindsight, we extended a week. And it was great, but you know what I mean, it was a week. And we're going to make a recording, and which was wonderful. And John could tell that I was lying, and all this enthusiasm was covering something. And John said, listen to me, kid. At least I think he said, listen to me, kid.
I'll bet he did. I'll bet he did.
Sounds like something he would say. Listen to me, kid. Said, you're going to write a masterpiece. And maybe the Wild Party is it. And they are going to shit all over you. And then you're going to write something else, and it's going to be good because you're good. But you'll know it's not the best thing you ever did. And that's the one that's going to make your name and your fortune. And from show to show, you have no idea which one it is. So go write another one. And I tell you that I tell that story as often as I can. And that story coupled with meeting with Arthur Lawrence a few months later, and Arthur asked me to write a score for a play he was working on. Arthur didn't even see the Wild Party, but he heard so many good things about it that he just took other people's word for it and said, I should hire this guy. And because of that, I've had a wonderful relationship with Arthur for the last 11 years of his life. And now I'm developing The Turning Point as a musical based on Arthur's screenplay, and I have the blessing of the estate. So it's kind of like Arthur is my posthumous collaborator, and I talk to Arthur daily, and it's absolutely wonderful. And so the final word about John and Fred is that a couple years later, maybe 2 or 3 years later, they came out with a book called Colored Lights, which was John and Fred in conversation with there it is.
With Greg Lawrence. You mean this book, right?
Mine's up on the bookshelf up there.
I love this book.
It's a beautiful book, and it's them talking about their career. And there's a couple pages towards the end of the book, which is at the present time when the book was coming out. It was chronological discussion. And they talked about seeing the Wild Party. And Fred, the quote I remember, I'm sure it's not exact, I'm paraphrasing, but the quote I remember was something like that. He goes, when I saw the Wild Party, I didn't want to just write like Andrew Lippa. I wanted to be Andrew Lippa.
That was Freddie.
I was like, what the hell? And I saw that when the book came out, and I called him and I said, what is wrong with you? I'm like, what? I love you. That is amazing. And you know, these are titans, giants. These are the people I want to be like. And also wrote show after show. And if you look at their shows, like, boy, did they have some amazing successes. But they also had a number of shows that most people don't remember outside of those of us who love musicals. And so that's called A Life in the Theater. Yeah. And their lives in the theater are quintessential lives in the theater, and ones that, you know, I just love them. They're and John is the kindest man.
Yes.
So what Julia said is so true. He's been a father figure or a grandfather figure to a great many of us.
And every once in a while, when I see him, or I'll think to, or if I hear this song, I think to myself, the strain bum, bum, ba-da-dum, bum, bum, ba-da, came out of his hands and his brain. That is one of the most famous. I mean, I did a concert in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and said that strain into the microphone. They all knew what it was. Yeah. And this man, this unassuming, he's just the best. Yeah.
I mean, I just love that. You know, you need people like that in your life, Andrew, because their first show they wrote together was Flora the Red Menace. I love that score. I love that show. It was not a hit at all, but the next day, after opening night, Hal Prince took them into his office and said, what do you want to work on next? I have this book on the Berlin stories, which eventually became Cabaret. I mean, you know, I have goosebumps just hearing you talk about John and Freddie telling you that, because I'm sure the Wild Party was a time, it was such a big high for all of you. I'm sure, Julia, you starring in this, maybe going to Broadway with this, Andrew, everything happening with this show, because it was phenomenal. There it is, the Wild Party. I mean, and then it's, you know, there's so many highs and lows in this business. The highs are so high and the lows can be so low, but you've got to surround yourself with a team of people who is your show family or your family that, you know, grounds you.
Look, ultimately, for me, you know, writing music and lyrics is primarily what I do. I do a lot of other things, but primarily I write songs. And for me to have John and Fred and Steven Schwartz and Sheldon Harnick and Stephen Sondheim and so many people I respect and admire, and I've left many names off the list, who have been my fans and friends, and who in my earliest part of my career said, you're great. Well, sure, I'll make that call on your behalf, or sure, I'll hire you. Stephen hired me to work on The Prince of Egypt. And from that, I worked on Snapshots, and that's how I met Julia. And then Stephen helped me win an award. And now Stephen serves in a capacity at the Dramatist Guild Foundation. Again, I mentioned that because I lead a board that includes Stephen Sondheim as one of its members. And like, I know that the world does that. I know that the children grow up to be the leaders and to take over, and our older members, they become our revered figures. But it actually happened in my life where the people I admired. So when I used to get hung up on what they said, whoever they were online, or the people who may be watching this right now, or the critics, or whoever, and I have gotten maybe 5% of me still gives a shit, and the rest of me is like, I don't give a shit. John Cantor thinks I'm good. And it's so much better to remember that. And that's why I try as hard as I can to be a mentor to younger writers now, and teach at Northwestern every summer, and work with young writers, because it's so important. I want to give what I was given to a whole new group of people.
And I think there's something to be said for, I say this a lot when I teach, that no matter what, any show that you're in, you are either going to leave or it's going to close. Yeah. That's just what's going to happen. You can't hold on to it. Even George Lee Andrews, who was in Phantom of the Opera for 37,000 years, eventually left the show. And so all you can take with you is the experience. Yeah. And of course, it was very saddening for Wild Party to not move to Broadway. That was part of the plan from the drop and all of that stuff. And we all knew it. And we did a huge photo shoot for a Broadway ad campaign. And we did all this stuff. And those of us who were like, let's be pragmatic. But when we did that photo campaign a few days before we opened, Brian and I were like, oh, we're moving to Broadway. I see. And then we didn't. Yeah. And it was really sad, but we still got to do our show. And luckily, we got to make this album that has allowed the show to live in a way that it wouldn't have. And that was back in the days when not everything got recorded.
Yeah.
These days, because it's digital, most things can get recorded and have some sort of life. And back then, things had to fit on the CD and all that kind of stuff. And so I've never felt like, beyond the initial feeling totally bummed about it, I never felt sad about the Wild Party. It's something that I've always held in my heart. And because every dang, probably not the Baptist ones, but every other college in the United States does that show.
Yeah.
And so every year there are these new graduates that I'll coach or something. And they're like, we just did the Wild Party.
I'm afraid that the Jewish Theological Seminary is not doing the Wild Party. Even though these are my people.
And I definitely went to a summer camp and watched an attempt at a junior version.
Yeah, not that either. Julia makes mention about the technology that we were in 2000 when we recorded the score. We recorded it on 2-inch tape as a backup because that is what you did. You had to have the 2-inch tape running in case Pro Tools crashed, which it did often. But we did record it in Pro Tools and 2-inch tape, and we have all that archived. But we also recorded one sequence in the show that we did not release because we're not allowed to release it. There's all the union rules and payments and all that stuff. But also, you can only fit about 72 minutes on a CD. And we pushed it on. And also, again, there are a lot of union payments that have to be considered after 60 minutes. And so, at least what the rules were then. And so, there is enough material on the Wild Party for a double record. And we didn't make a double record because we didn't have the money to make a double record. So, maybe in the future we'll get that opportunity. But
I love that.
What we did get was life-changing, particularly for me, because it gave, and Julia points to herself, it was life-changing for a good number of us because we had this business card now that we could say, well, look, we can do this. Yeah. And, we don't necessarily need to do this again, but like if we can do this, we could probably do that. And that's been, the Wild Party changed, particularly me and Julia. I think it really, and Stephen Oremus, I should mention Oremus as well, because Stephen I love him. Stephen built a very big career on the foundation of having done the Wild Party. And again, it all goes back to Stephen Schwartz because Stephen, Julie and I met through working on Stephen's show. Stephen hired Stephen Oremus for Wicked because of the Wild Party. Stephen and Julia had quite a run in Wicked, both on the road and in New York City. And so I do think Stephen Schwartz is the hero of this story.
Yeah. He's the link. He's the link of all things.
I know Stephen
Schwartz wins.
Oh yeah, we're gonna lose Julia shortly. So
no, it's okay. My 1 o'clock got bumped, so it's okay.
Oh, I love this because I have to talk about Stephen Schwartz. We'll get into the CD too. Your CD is one of my favorites. We'll get into that. But talking about Stephen Schwartz, Wicked, you got to take on the coveted role of Elphaba. You did it on tour first. I mean, I had friends see you across the country who didn't know who you were.
I went to
blew them away, and then you came to Broadway in this. What was it like being the Green Woman and taking on that role? What did Wicked mean to you?
It was hard as hell, and incredibly satisfying. At the same time, and it was something that, again, like I was up for it initially, and obviously didn't get it, and I went to opening night to cheer on my friend Adina. Yeah, and I'll tell you, by the end of that show, I was like, "Ooh, better her than me. That's a lot. That's a lot to do." I'm serious. Even though, I mean, technically, I sang more as Queenie in the Wild Party than Elphaba sings, but there's just like a different thing that goes on in Wicked in terms of screaming, yelling at monkeys, yelling at Fiyero. Queenie's sort of like this and has little blips, and Elphaba's like la, 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 from the beginning. And I had never replaced in a show. I had never toured, so it was a lot of like brand new, scary monster things, and the cast couldn't have been more wonderful. When I went out on the road, I was replacing Stephanie Block, who I knew, but she'd been out for a year, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm replacing someone who's, you know, just so kick-ass and so iconic in her own way, and how do I do this? And that's when I just understood, oh, it's everyone welcomes the new folk in. Like, you have to, and to get to go around. I mean, it was a bummer, frankly, because I was so tired. It was a bummer to not really get to explore the cities that I was in. That part, because I spent a lot of time in my hotel room, being quiet and watching Judging Amy back to back on TNT. And years later, I played Tyne Daly, was in the TV show Judging Amy, and I played Tyne Daly's daughter in a reading, and I was like, I have to tell you something. While I was on tour with Wicked, you saved me. You saved me because you're so good at Judging Amy. And she was like, ma'am, 5 steps back, please. And then to get to do it in your, I mean, it's to be in the rock star role in a big hit like that is something else. Yeah. It's so sort of, and it was a great lesson also in learning to give yourself a break and let go, because I'll tell you, the gift that keeps on giving is ending The Wizard and I all alone on stage and feeling like you kind of junked it. Like you didn't do what you know you're capable of doing, but you're so tired. That's not what came out. And people are clapping and you want to be like, would you like your money back? Do you want a credit card? You want to do it. And you don't get to go off stage and be like, you cross left and you start another song. Yeah. That's the way with Wicked. And so the story I had to tell in my brain was just tell the story. Just tell the story. The majority of these people don't know the difference. Yes, the musicians in the house will probably like, she's tired. But like Joe and Mary from Sioux City are just coming to see Wicked and they're so excited. And you have to tell the story for them. You have to always tell it like no one has seen it before. And that was a very interesting lesson to have to retell myself. And that cast was just, you know, it's, again, all you get to take with you are the crew guys who you know have your back because they're flying you in the air. And then the cast who have your back because when you walk off stage and you start crying and you have to cry like this when you're green because otherwise you streak. Fun fact, put that in your cut. But like,
also, another fun fact, if I may, Julia, is while Julia and I were performing in Snapshots, Stephen Schwartz's musical, he was reading the book Wicked. And while we were working on that show, he was carrying that book around.
Who told him about the book?
Julia Murney told him about the book. And he read the book. So really, Julia Murney deserves a lot of
talked about this. Stephen and I have discussed this, and he swears someone on some boat, like in Hawaii, told him about it. I'm like, all I'm here to tell you is that we were in Virginia.
And then the rest, of course, is show business.
I went into a bookstore in Norfolk, Virginia, saw that book. I was like, that looks interesting, and I read it, and I loved it. I loved it, and I was telling everybody about it. Cut to years later.
Yeah. Julia Murney's Wicked.
I love yours. I stand behind your stories. I stand behind you too with that. Listen, your solo debut recording, I'm Not Waiting, is one of my favorites. It's on autoplay all the time in my house. Andrew, I know you wrote it. Part of it, I know you produced this album. I mean, there's a cut song from Wild Party on that, right?
Yes, when I first met him.
Okay.
It's so funny. I can't remember what actually ended up in the show.
So Tom asked me a few months ago, did I want to get a Google, an Alexa home thing that's a big speaker that's nice, or do I want to get an Apple Home thing? And he said the Apple Home thing has better sound, but not as good AI. And I'm like, let's get something with better sound. I've never regretted a purchase as much because it never understands me and it hates me and it won't turn off when I say its name, turn off, or hi, its name, and it won't turn on. And so the other day, I said, hey, her name, play, and I don't remember what it was. It had nothing to do with Julia Murney. And it played Fancy from I'm Not Waiting, Julia Murney's recording. And I was like, I looked at Tom, I was like, that's Julia Murney on the record that I produced, and it's Julia Murney singing the Beavis McIntyre or whoever recorded that song.
Yeah.
And who's singing backups? One of them is Mr. Andrew Lippa.
Oh, there you go. And I hadn't listened to it in a long time, and I was like, that's good. That's very good. Nicely.
Is it good?
Record.
I don't listen to it.
Record.
Yeah, I don't tend to put my album
Random. She just decided to play Julia Murney.
It's such a beautiful album. I mean, the synergy you two have together. But I think that all started in that audition room for the Stephen Schwartz show. I mean, you two were just meant to, Yeah,
and I was just gonna say we made it so quickly because I decided to make it as soon as I knew I was doing Wicked.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't even get one music director. So we recorded it in 2 full fat days. One day was music directed by Stephen Aremus.
Yeah. Oh,
and the other one by Tom Kitt.
Like, come on.
All
brilliant.
produced by
and the wonderful Joel Moss was the engineer on that recording.
Yeah.
Really great guy. And great.
They used to have a contest at Wicked because I'm also blonde on the album cover. My hair is blonde. So they used to have a contest at Wicked to see how many copies of the album they could sell at intermission when I was out of the show. Because nobody knew the difference. They would just be like, we've got Elphabet's album. People are like, right, I'll take 3.
Oh, fabulous.
I love that. You know, there's so much I could cover with you all, but we're running out of time. But I have to talk to Andrew about Harvey Milk. I had the privilege of being invited to your rehearsal room when you had that big orchestra, that last rehearsal before you were going to the big house.
Yeah, down at what was 37 Arts at the Baryshnikov.
You know, I had the privilege of meeting Harvey Milk, the final performance at Inner City in New York City. I think it was March of 1972. I went to the closing performance. Linda Hopkins blew the roof off the house. I met this very nice man at the back of the house at the end because I was like freaking out over the show. And he said, hi, I'm Harvey Milk. I'm one of the associate producers of this show. I was 12 years old. He said, what did you love about this show and what got you here? So I told him my whole story. So when you took on, I don't think I told you that story, but it was so nice meeting him that day, but to watch you take on Harvey Milk and what you did with that. What did that whole show that you put together mean to you?
In a lot of ways, it's the most profoundly important thing. I think if the Wild Party's near the very beginning, I hope I'm Harvey Milk is another line in my career that I'm in another phase of. And we'll see, I don't know. But I was asked to write a 5-minute piece for the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, and I didn't want to write a 5-minute piece. I wanted to write a full-length work. And so I called up Tim Seelig, the artistic director of the chorus, and asked him if I could write a full-length work, and we talked about why I would want to do that. He said he would speak to the other choruses who were co-commissioning, and they all agreed, yeah, let's do it. And we premiered it in San Francisco in 2013 with the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus and Laura Benanti and I, and that's when we recorded it. It happened to be that morning of the premiere. The morning of the premiere, June 26, 2013, is when the Supreme Court struck down the Defense of Marriage Act and Proposition 8. And it was kind of an amazing experience because the audience of 1,500 people, but they were already primed to like it. We were in San Francisco. It was the gay chorus. We were 2 blocks away from where George Moscone and Harvey Milk had been gunned down. And then we did this piece on this day that the Supreme Court supported gay rights, and the place went crazy. What we learned over the years, doing it at Disney Hall, doing it with 750 people in Denver, we did it at Lincoln Center for 2,700 people with 350 artists, the Orchestra of St. Luke's and me, Kristen Chenoweth, and other great performers from Broadway. What we learned was that the audience always responds this way, and somehow there's something happens in I Am Harvey Milk that adds up to frenzy, and it's a magnificent feeling as a writer. But then when I play Harvey Milk, I don't watch Harvey Milk. I've never seen it. The only ones I've ever been at are the ones I've been in, and it's just been a profoundly enriching experience. I'm so glad we got it recorded, and I hope that we have future life for it, and find other ways to share it with people.
Yeah, I have to ask you about the Dramatists Guild. Talk about this incredible organization. I mean, Julia, you've done some of their benefits with Andrew. Talk about that. Yeah.
Sure. It's a really wonderful honor, and particularly right now, to serve as the president of the board of the Dramatists Guild Foundation. I'm in my 5th year, and dgf.org. If any writers of the theater are listening in, or if you know any writer in the theater who needs any assistance during this particular time, please send them to dgf.org. Our webpage, our homepage has an emergency grant button right at the top where you can just click on that and be directed to the page where you can apply for an emergency grant. As of this week, we've given out almost $500,000 in emergency grant aid in the past 8 weeks to writers across the United States. And the work we do is to support and promote the work of America's dramatists. A lot of that is educational, but some of that is emergency grants, which is a foundational program. We were established in 1962 by Alan J. Lerner and others who wanted to help writers. And so we are in this phase right now where we see enormous need. We are responding very quickly. When we get an emergency grant application, we respond within 48 hours, we send money. And our average grants, somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000 per individual is what we're able to do at the moment. But that money, in lots of cases, gets people through several months to be able to help supplement their lack of income. So many playwrights, if they had performances of productions, they've been canceled. If they had new plays or new musicals, they have been canceled or postponed, but they're not happening this year. Hardly anyone is licensing musicals or plays at the moment. Playwrights already make very little money, and when they do, they often make it from teaching or other sources that are also being slowed down, if not dried up entirely. So it's wonderful to be able to serve in this capacity. Again, dgf.org.
Beautiful. And just projects, I know Between the Lines, Julia, we cannot wait for. I mean, I've been following this, so I cannot wait for that to come back. Andrew, what's going on with the Tiger King? Parody, musical, like?
It was, quite seriously, it was at first it was just it seemed like, oh my God, there's something more insane going on than what's going on. And so I decided to write a song, and I called Kristen and I said, would you do this? And she's like, sure. And then she really jumped in with the video. And then Frankie James Grande called her and said, can you connect me to Andrew? And so I spoke to Frankie, and we did Husband Number 2. And that's been seen by I don't know how many gazillion people. And now I'm getting calls from other people, and we're actually I'm having a chat this afternoon with a producer and my agent about the potential of, like, would we want to do this as a show?
Yeah.
And, it's just, but the thing I found out while I've been working on it and talking about it is that it's a show. If you haven't seen the show, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but it's a show about charismatic leaders, Joe Exotic, Doc Antle, Carol Baskin, charismatic leaders who demand absolute fealty from the people who work for them or surround them. And that when they don't behave in the way that those leaders want them to, they are abused, they are fired, they are humiliated. And those people are dependent on those leaders for their income and their work and their passion for animals, but they're also behind their backs, always criticizing them and sometimes leave them and betray them. I can think of no greater metaphor than our current one in our government in the United States, but not just the United States, in Brazil, in Hungary, in Turkey, in so many places that purport to be democracies, but that are pushing towards something very dangerous. And it seems to me like that's why people have been so obsessed with Tiger King, not only because it's kooky, but because it's kookier than we are right now, but only barely.
Yep. Well, like I said, we're going to do this again in a month because I got to talk to you about the Addams Family, which I know is like the second most produced show in North America. Musical,
most produced show in North America, 4 out of the last 5 years. And when it wasn't the most, it was number 2. Let's get that statistic out there.
Listen, because like I said, I got to see that numerous times on Broadway and on the tour. I love your work in that. The Turning Point, I'm fascinated about. I would love to hear more about The Turning Point. And like I said, I just want to thank our audience for tuning in today. And like I said, there's wonderful things. If you are ever thinking of donating anything, $1 or $10 or whatever, of course, there's the Dramatists Guild, there's the Actors Fund, but there's also BroadwayCares.org, because this is the time period that this 6 weeks is when Broadway Cares is in all the Broadway theaters and all the theaters across the country and around the world. They usually raise over $6 million at this time with the Red Bucket Follies. All of your shows have participated. You've all done so much for Broadway Cares. But online right now, they have the COVID-19 Emergency Assistance Fund online. They have raised well over $5 million online, which they have already donated to the Actors Fund. So like I said, if anyone out there is thinking of donating, think of the Dramatist Guild, the Actors Fund, BroadwayCares.org. I want to thank the two of you.
Just think about how much how entertainment has saved you during this quarantine, and if that was all gone.
Yeah. This has been so great because all the fans were so excited about today because there are so many composers and lyricists. We're going to tune in today for Andrew. Julia, you're a goddess. I mean, there are people all around the world who are like, I bow before Julia Murney, that voice that God tapped her on the shoulder and just said, boy, she's got it all. I have known both of you since you first got to New York. I mean, John and Jen for Andrew and Julia, I saw you in all the benefits and we were all like, when is she going to do a big show? But I mean, I just love that we could all be here today. And like I said, you put a face on the pandemic of people of just watching to figure out how everyone's getting through this. I mean, how you're doing it, you know, and Andrew, how you're doing it in Columbus, Ohio. So I thank you both from the bottom of my heart and everybody at Broadway World for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
All righty. We'll do it again. Take care, everybody. Stay safe and wash your hands. And the theater will be back bigger and better, and we'll all be there. Take care.